So, I know I'm babbling on here, Ed. I hope I'm not rattling too much.
You're nailing it. You're nailing it. This is
all right.
Okay.
So now we're getting back to that official. He makes a bad call. How does he let that go? Okay. They may do the TV report on it, and he blew it again. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the issue is you gotta officiate forward. You can't hold on to the past. But there may be that moment as the official's walking back that he makes a fist with his right hand, tightens it, releases the fist, walks back, picks up his focal point, the flag at the far end, pulls his chest up, takes a nice breath, claps his hands, whatever, boom, I'm back. Do we need a moment? Yes, we need a moment sometimes. And I would have to work with the officials to figure out how do you get to that next moment. What's the time frame that I get to let that play go and the next play begin? Okay? In baseball, I talk to the pitchers about this is going to sound like a stupid question to your audience, but when does the last pitch end and the next pitch begin? And that may be an interesting question for your officials, Ed.
Yeah.
When does the last possession end and the next possession begin?
Right.
Because I think it varies based upon what happened and what I did. Because if I'm the pitcher and I execute my pitch and it's a great one, I'm on the next pitch real quick. If I blew it and I hung my pitch or it's off, I'm still on that last pitch because I've got to process the information of what happened and make the adjustment. Because peak performance, like I said earlier, is more about compensating and adjusting, having that good crappy day, bobbing and weaving. There's going to be some of that. Don't be surprised by it. Okay? I mean, I work with Olympic figure skaters, and you want to talk about there's no such thing as perfection. There's no perfection. There's just the illusion of perfection. And they make mistakes, but you're not going to see it. You know, but they know they blew it. But they've got to get to the next thing they're doing. Boy, I'm going blah, blah, blah.
No,
Better
this is good.
slow
This
down
is
here.
good.
Got me worked up.
Actually, hey, I'm with it. This is exciting. I was sitting down to start this. I'm up walking around the office now. Let me say this.
You fired up. I love it, man.
In officiating, there are many times where we make mistakes in mechanics, and other than our partners might notice it, nobody really notices it. I mean, especially, at the higher levels because people are so good, and even in camp situations where, people cover for each other. And so that would be, similar to the skating. All right, now let me, because to me, the possession by possession is what it's at, and that's the pitch by pitch. I mean, a made field goal is the start of a new possession. A call of a foul or a violation where there's a turnover, or you're going to a free throw line, that's the start of a new possession. A defensive rebound, to me, is the start of a new possession. A steal to go to the other end is the start of a new possession.
But let's say there's a TV review, Ed, on a call you made, and you thought you were right, and the TV shows you were wrong, and you get to go over there and see that you blew it. Can you let that go immediately?
You have no choice. But now, and let me say this: in the NBA, they have the system has become more and more sophisticated. But our members, probably 90% of the people that are on this call, they do not work video replay. They're hoping to get to a level. And in Division I they have it, and of course in the NBA it's very sophisticated because they have a replay center. But here's what happens in basketball is that if you're in an arena where they have the jumbotron or the replay stuff, but you may have a call and all the players look up at the thing to see what the call looked like, and this is judgment. You can't change your play, and we will get external reaction different than players. You make a call and it's an incorrect call, especially against the home team, you're going to get a lot of reaction, and the reaction is going to carry on. So you have to find a way to block out the outside noise because there's going to be ongoing outside noise that's not going to be very favorable. Right.
Right.
So that's
and one of the things that can be helpful there is it's sort of like for the official, going back to those three gentlemen, I would ask them, what do they go to after a mistake to get themselves back? And part of it's going to be your body language, that you're going to have your moment where you're upset or whatever. We're a human being. It's going to happen. But the issue comes when I step here and I bring my hand to the whistle. When I'm connected with the whistle or whatever, I am locked in. Now, if I need to take a break, I remove the whistle. There's got to be some type of trigger that clicks in, I'm here, okay?
Right.
I'm in. And it may be body position. It may be planting that rear foot. It may be taking your hand and putting it in a certain position. But you've got to do something so there's a behavioral cue that you can see that the person's there. So when you watch the E60 thing, when Evan takes a bad swing, he steps out, he undoes his gloves, takes a swing, gets a breath, gets back in. Now, as an official, you're not going to have that length of time to do it. But you could have a 3-second window that you could get something together that you could go to.
Sure.
But I think the big thing here, Ed, that I really want to emphasize is we got to start embracing adversity, realize things are going to go sideways, and really work at times making things less crappy instead of trying to make them great.
Along those lines, I don't know if we touched on this, but how about the self-talk part? I mean, I know you've touched on that, but is there any patterns or deliberation to self-talk? And what kind of counsel would we give our members? I think
trying to keep the self-talk, I always talk to athletes about the 3 Ps. Keep it as positive as you can, keep it in the present focus, and keep it related to your process that you're working on. Okay? What do I need to do now? This is what I'm focused on. I'm not focused on officiating a great game. That's ridiculous. Let's focus on what's going on right here, right now. So if I'm present, I'm positive, I'm into the process. That's key to the puzzle. You know, I think one thing, Ed, that I'd like to share with your audience, mainly because it really impacted my work, and it really pulled a lot of things together, and I think it can pull some of this together for us. About 15 years ago, I was back in Richmond, Virginia, doing a clinic for baseball coaches, and I was talking about one pitch at a time. And at this clinic, when I was done, there were probably 300 coaches. I talked an hour or so. Coaches came up, they asked me questions. One gentleman said, I'm not a baseball guy, but I got so much out of your talk that can help me in the work that I do. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said, I'm the head of cardiovascular surgery at the University of Virginia. And we're one of 7 centers in the United States where we bring in the top cardiovascular surgeons from around the world, and we train them in how to do a heart transplant operation. And I said, you got something out of my talk? And we ended up talking and having lunch together that day, and he explained to me that a heart transplant at that time, because this was before robotics, at that time, it would take 90 people from the people that would fly out, nurses, helicopter pilots, bring the heart back, and when they brought the heart back, it would come back with the lungs attached so that they would simultaneously end up doing 2 lung transplant operations with the heart transplant operation. And all of that had to be coordinated. And I'm sitting there hearing this guy talking. And he says to me, he said, you talk about one pitch at a time? He said, I'm talking about one stitch at a time. But he said, I'm always telling the people one stitch at a time, but I don't really tell them how to do it. You're saying for the pitchers, you got to be in control of yourself. You got to be clear what's your plan with the next pitch. And you got to trust your ability. He said, I'm going to use that. And he explained that the challenge they have is when they take the heart transplant operation can take 6 to 8 hours to perform. When they take, at that time, when they take the heart out, the old one out, and they take the new heart off the machine, Ed, every beat is dying. And he said, we have to get 20 stitches in that heart. And the key becomes, like John Wooden used to say, you have to be quick, but you can't rush. He said the first 16 stitches are automatic, no problem. He said the last 4 stitches, if the incision is wrong, decision of where you're putting the stitch is wrong, or the stitch execution is wrong, the patient dies immediately. And I said, you're comparing this to baseball. I said, well, that part's different. But he said, you said the perfect pitch is a problem in baseball? In our business, he said, and your audience will like this, Ed, the perfect stitch kills. Because the perfect stitch takes too long to perform. Make a good stitch. Officiate a good game. Have a good Olympic performance. Stop trying to have a great one, because great comes out of good.
Wow. Yes. Okay.
Now,
oh, wow. Okay.
I get to go back to University of Virginia. I had a sabbatical, thanks to Cal State Fullerton, the following year, and I went back there, and Ed, I got to spend 2 weeks hanging out with these guys, and man, unbelievable. Couple things I want to just share with the audience. They start out the day of the surgery sitting in a meeting, going over what they could anticipate is going to happen. They go over x-rays, they go over computer-generated things they had, and they end their meeting with, be ready to compensate and adjust. And what I discovered in my 2 weeks there is every one of us has a face, 2 eyes, nose, mouth, ears. Every face is different. Every heart is different. Every surgery is different. Every game is different. The gentleman you talked about that officiated his 50th playoff game, man, what a guy. I mean, every one of those games was different, man. I'm positive everyone was different.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
And he had to work it in different ways. And that's how these guys talked about the surgeries. Now, from that meeting room, they go down to their changing room where they dress, they scrub down, they put on the gowns. And he said to me back at the clinic when we had lunch, he said, when we go into surgery, we get big. And I didn't know what he meant. When I was there with them, when they walked out of that changing locker room area down to the operating room, Ed, they got big, the way they carried themselves. And this is the whole idea of putting on the officiating gear, taking it out of your trunk, putting on the gear. You're dressing up. You're putting on the official, okay? And then the whole walking into the yard in baseball. And I've seen officials the way they walk onto the court. They own that court. This is the court. Okay, this is my area. This is now, we're not being disrespectful of other people.
No.
But we're just boom. And part of taking that ownership is what I talked about earlier, getting out on the court, checking it out, getting familiar with it, getting your focal point. The lighting's a little off here. This is down here. These stands are in tight. I don't like this. Great. You got about 5 minutes to not like it, but then you better adjust to it because that's the way the court is. Okay? And you're going to have to work it. But these guys went in, Ed, and they got big when they went in there, and then they did their thing in the operating room. After the surgery, they come out, they shower, they scrub down, and interesting, Ed, they have a meeting, and this is the debriefing. This is what I saw from the heart surgeons. This is what I saw from the military folks. After every mission in the military, there is a debriefing. It doesn't happen the next day. It happens at the end of the mission. And that's where, for some of our officials, it may be after the game when you're with the other officials, because those other officials, that is your team. I mean,
right.
you're alone as an official, but you have the other guys or gal that you're officiating with, and you're that team. And there may be some debriefing that goes there, but there's got to be some debriefing in terms of yourself, and sometimes it's on the ride home. And I would encourage the officials to keep a notebook and write stuff down and get, what did they learn? What did I get out of this? I took 4 hours out of my life to do this tonight. What the hell did I learn? How am I better from it, you know? Now, I'm babbling on and on again, Ed, but I wanted to get that out there.
That is, right there is, you have just articulated really the path for success. I mean, the preparation, when you talk about, walking on the floor like you belong there. We just had a camp in St. Joe, and the coach of St. Joe University, Phil Martelli, who's been there for years, said he wants to see officials walk on the floor as if they belong there, they are glad to be there, and they are there to run the game. He wants to see that in their body language. He says, if I see that, I'm comfortable. I'm just going to go coach my team. That's exactly what he said. He reads their nonverbal. The whole thing is, am I there to run the game, and am I glad I'm here, and am I connected to this? What's going on? Am I ready to go? He reads that, and he says, when I see that, I'm good to go. That's exactly what he said. So that's reinforces that.
And in relation to it, Ed, having something to go to when it goes sideways, to release it, get yourself back, pull the chest up, and now I'm back. And you got 2 seconds to do it, man, maybe 3.
We're going to have to practice our breathing. We're going to do some of that in our next camp. I think we'll do some of these breathing exercises. Now, if I know we've got a lot of people that are probably saying, well, I'd like to ask Ken this, I'd like to ask Ken that. We just have a few minutes. Rob, we have what?
I forgot about the questions, Ed. I'm
sorry. That's all right. No. Don't worry about it. Listen, everything you said here is totally relevant. I mean, Ed Jr. and I have talked about debriefing. Obviously, him being an F-18 pilot, debriefing was a critical part of what he did, and trying to translate that into the officiating world, and that's why we encourage people to use videotape and to go back and say, all right, let's look at this situation again. What we have done here? Do we like this? Yes, we did. And and kind of unravel things, both the good and some things that we can improve upon. So, Rob, do you have any questions on the internet before we go to the group as a whole?
No, let's go right to the live portion of the call here with star 2. If you have a question to our members, star 2. We'll raise your hand and we'll get you live on the line.
I know a lot of people on this call, and I was, as Ken was going through this, I was visualizing, different people. Steve Weaver, I was visualizing how you were hearing this, and I know that how much this kind of the mental approach means to you, and how we've been working on it. And I think the other thing is that, Ken, this is what I say. I think officials, and probably the same thing with athletes. I mean, we talked about Chris Bryant. I think they have to practice this stuff I don't think it's just going to happen like, oh yeah, I'll start doing this now, and it just happens in a 2-week period.
Right.
To me, the people I've talked to who have really started to understand it, I don't know that anybody really understands it to the level that you just articulated to us, but we can certainly move in that direction. But I think it's a lengthy process to get there. I mean, kind of build layers.
And that's where, Ed, so much of my energy has been on today's practice, today's training. That's where there aren't enough games. You got to do it in your practice and your training. And and it comes. This is going to sound stupid, but it's like sitting at the ATM machine and there's a line, and you start getting upset. Can you catch that? Can you be aware of it? go to your breathing, get yourself together a little bit, and
Yeah.
So how can we practice it in different aspects of our lives?
Sure.
And we do have a question here. We'll go to Tyler, Texas. Deke Jones.
Deke Jones from Tyler, Texas. Okay.
Hello, Coach.
Right.
Dr. Ken, I just wanted to ask you, and great information, taking lots of notes here. Do you have any books? I know you've written some yourself, sir. Do you have any books that you recommend as kind of like continuing education that might continue the process for what you gave us tonight?
The book I've written is Heads Up Baseball, and you could take a look at that and make the translation to officiating. The other thing I would do is contact Human Kinetics Press. I think they're in Champaign, Illinois, and I know they have some officiating books, and I'm sure, Ed, you would have a whole bunch that you could recommend. I know they have officiating books that address the mental aspects of it, the psychological.
Well, you know what's interesting is I reference people to a lot of different books, books like Blink and some other things like that. But there really is not a really reservoir of books that address this topic to the officiating community. There really isn't. So this might be Dr. Ken Ravizza and Ed Rush get together sometime to talk about this, because
there you go.
There might be a place for something
I'll tell
like
you,
this.
A book that really influenced me, and it sounds crazy, is a book called The Inner Game of Tennis.
And
he's talking about tennis, but it's anything we're doing,
Yeah.
And I've used The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Gallwey. It's a very good book. And it gets into the self-talk and that type of stuff.
Right. I actually read that like halfway through my career, and it was a time when I was trying to figure out why I was getting plays wrong. Was it my ability to get in the right place, or was it my concentration? Right. And I realized that I had to improve my concentration, and somebody put me onto that book, and it was very helpful.
Interesting. Okay.
A lot of subconscious mind stuff.
Yes, and just realizing that that's going to happen.
Yeah. Right. Very good. All right, Deke. Other questions, gentlemen, ladies.
Okay, start two. Get you in right away here.
I think another thing while we're waiting for the call is, and it's something you touched on at the end, is having someone come in and watch you officiate and give you some feedback. It may be a friend. It may be another official. And sometimes in another sport is also good that could come in and give you some feedback. But always getting it from someone else is helpful. Not that they're right, but at least they give you a different perspective.
Well, the interesting thing in our game and in sports officiating in general is that there's a shortage of trainers, there's a shortage of coaches, and the ratio is not good. Joe Madden manages the Cubs, and he's got 25 players, and he's got 5 or 6 coaches, and that's a pretty good ratio of player to coach. Well, in our business, you might have one coordinator who has 100 officials, 75 officials. Now, in the NBA is the closest thing to that. There's 4 or 5 leaders, 1 or 2 people that are designated leaders and other assistants, and there are 60 officials. Right. But even with that, they don't get direct feedback every single game. They get more than any other place. But there are college officials that work at a high level that get little or no feedback. They just work games. And that's one of the
I think, Ed, that's where the self-reflection, where you have to spend some time looking at your performance and, what went well as I officiated tonight? What did I do a really good job at? What do I have to get better at? And then what you said earlier about watching tapes of the game, if you can get access to them, if you talk to some of those coaches and you can get some feedback there, that could be helpful.
Well, we have a system of retrieving and reviewing video, and now today with the certainly with the internet and different some of the softwares out there, And that's one of the things that's big with Court Club is that, we provide video all season long. Every Wednesday we submit video to them, so they have pictures of what right looks like.
Good.
And we try to give them as many examples from different venues throughout the country as possible. Rob Rourke, who's our director here, does a tremendous job of putting all this stuff together, and we do this.
Yeah.
We now do voiceover, and we have Telestrator, and so we've advanced in this area. So we're doing some stuff that is cutting edge, but at the same time, there is a shortage of somebody saying, "Hey, come on over here, let's talk about it." I mean, I was standing there at Petco Park, and I was watching you and Joe, behind the cage, and during BP, and just you're just watching guys and watching their rhythm, their swing, and there was occasionally you had something to say to somebody, and you're thinking about the availability that those guys have for input that officials don't have.
Right.
Right. And that the way that potentially you can prepare, and that's something that we're trying to provide somewhat of a service to help with that. And what you have said to us tonight, I can tell you, as much as I've talked about this, I mean, Rob, tell me, 60% of this they haven't heard this way.
Yeah, it's a different approach, and it's been spot on, and we thank you, Ken. We actually have a question that came through on the web. That's an interesting question.
Okay.
And it's from Jim in Collegeville, Pennsylvania, and he asked, sometimes for officials it's difficult to work with partners,
yes,
and that may create anxiety for us on the floor.
Yes.
What do you suggest in that particular situation when we're having these types of feelings in relation to our partners and not necessarily the game or the pressure involved?
Oh, boy, isn't that true? One, I think one of the key things is you have to focus on what do I have control of and what don't I have control of. And I don't have control of the crowd. I don't have control of the team of officials I'm working with, just like the person that works at McDonald's. They go on their shift. There's that idiot who's on the shift. They've got to cope with that person. And those are times where all of a sudden everything's going great. It's a green light day. Now I walk into this environment. Oh, God, I got that. Now the issue becomes one of that, hey, if you can talk to that person and you guys or gals can work it out, great. If not, then you're going to have to deal with it as best you can. And that's getting to that next possession, realizing that there may be some calls that you're going to have to compensate and adjust. Embrace the adversity versus, oh, God, it's not going perfect. And embrace it. For the young official, you better get real good at handling other officials that you don't like working with. You got to learn how to do that. You got to learn how to get it done because you don't have control of it. When I'm talking to the baseball players, they're playing for some managers they don't like. But, hey, man, at the end of the year when your contract's being negotiated, no one's asking you if you like the manager or not. You got to perform.
Ken, I have to tell you, I listen to a lot of Joe Madden's press conferences because I think that he's got meaningful information. But he's stealing a lot of your stuff in those press conferences.
Joe and I have learned it together over the years, man.
Oh, I know. I mean, how close you are.
And that's one of the things that I've learned, I've learned so much from the coaches and athletes that I've had the privilege to learn from. And I've always been interested in learning from officials because I think what you people are dealing with is you don't have the home bench. What I'm getting from our conversation is you do have each other. Your team is the other officials and the people at the score table. Possibly. I don't know how that plays out.
Sometimes.
But, where's your support? Where's your thing to go to? That would be interesting in learning about your world.
It is. That is really critical, and in some cases it's shallow because some nights you're working with people who really believe in you, and there's a great system going, and you lean on each other, but there's more often than not, there is a combination that is not exactly perfect, and that's just human beings, and that's just kind of the way it is. And I like the thing about what you just said. Okay, fine, it's not going to be that great. Let's embrace it and take on the challenge.
Right, and that goes back to, were you that crappy? You have to feel great to officiate well.
Yeah.
You know, and you're not.
Yeah.
You can get it done. You know, you can get it done.
Well, I can look at my career in the NBA and even my 10th or 12th year, and there was an official, was a veteran official who I had just could not work well with, and I had a mental block, and my judgment was not as good when I was on the floor with him because I was always wondering out of the corner of my eye what he was going to do. And this was in the two-man system, but, you know, and I know that it affected my work, and I was much better off when I was with somebody else. I never was able to overcome that, and that was my maturity at that time. Well,
but I think that's the type of thing we learn as we get older, and if we can learn it sooner, you know, how to work with other people that we don't get along with. That's workplace stuff as well, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean but that's real. That's real stuff you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, this has been phenomenal, and I can tell you that I know now why Joe Madden has such admiration for you, and you know I know that how much you mean to him because when I saw you know how important it was that he had you at Tampa Bay, and then of course as soon as he got the Cubs job, and then I knew you were going to show up. I mean that's an incredible testimony when you think about the enormity of the position that Joe has taken on with the Cubs, but and just to know the authenticity of that relationship. But frankly, I'm going to tell you that I'm very excited about us continuing this discussion and getting together and carrying on. I mean, we'll talk about our, some of our other training, our camps, and the other things that we do.
I'd love to. Ed, it would be great to share ideas with your folks and learn from you guys as much as you learn from me. It'd be wonderful. No problem, man.
This has been, Rob, this has been one of the best right here. This has been tremendous.